Get full access to RFR only on Patreon. Become a member of the RFR Patreon community to get more Rebel Force Radio. Bonus shows and content are available right now only at patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio.
Rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times. Star Wars #1.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Natalie Portman says that the backlash to the Star Wars prequels was a bummer. That's a quote. She's talking to the folks at Empire Online, and she says it was hard. It was a bummer because it felt like people were so excited about the new movies, and then to have people feel disappointed. Also, to be at an age that I didn't really understand, that's kind of the nature of the beast. When something has that much anticipation, it can almost only disappoint. Mm-hmm. But she does give us hope. She says, with the perspective of time, it's been reevaluated by a lot of people who actually really love them now. There's a very avid group of people who think they're the best ones now. I don't have enough perspective to weigh in. But I think she's absolutely right. We've talked about it here on this show. We've actually even had articles written about the Rotten Tomatoes scores of the prequels. They have gone up, some more than others. But I don't know about you, Jim. I mean, I certainly had my gripes coming out of the theaters after each one, but it certainly didn't ruin anything for me. I was just as excited for the next. In fact, the anticipation between the prequels for me was just absolute off the charts.
True. Very true. Anticipation going into the prequels was off the charts. But I never really suffered from being in a situation where I felt like I didn't like the movies, or like you said, you came out with gripes. The only one that had me scratching my head a little bit was Attack of the Clones. And I remember I was with my brother, and we were at the bar right next to the theater after it had let out. And I said, that was really good, right? That was really good, right?
Okay, well, maybe that's a better description. I mean, there was an aspect of not quite grasping what I had just saw with all three of them. And so those trips that I think we've talked about this before, that we would make to, the bookstore or the toy store after the movie and, grab up a bunch of the making of behind the scenes, comic book adaptation, whatever it was, to help us kind of process everything that was being laid down on us. At least that's what I did.
Yeah, well, you had to. And it deserves all of your analysis because that's what we do, I mean, we watch these films and we talk about them forever. I'm still picking apart A New Hope. Let's face it. There's a lot of different things you can look at and find in those movies. But with me and the prequels, I was on board that ride all the way through. But, yeah, I mean, there's obvious, as we say, flaws in those movies. But I noted about 10 years ago, I felt like, hey, these things are aging pretty well. I think they're, they look really great. I think they attract people to the story. At least visually, it attracts people. Phantom Menace has, for my money, the best saber fight in just about the entire saga. It has the pod race, which was and still is a marvel of special effects. And it's the origin story. It's where it all begins. Obi-Wan, Anakin, Palpatine, and the eventual mother of Luke and Leia. It's so just the nature of it, I think, makes it enriches it just instantly. And as Star Wars continues to move forward, I think you start to see exactly what the prequels have to offer to the saga on a whole. And at the end of the day, I'm never saying to myself, boy, I wish those prequels never existed. Star Wars would be so much better without them. No, just the opposite. I always say those prequels enrichen the entire saga. So, yeah, I'd say about 10 years ago, I really started to get a vibe that as the audience for The Phantom Menace was maturing, that you would be able to have people who would be able to be more articulate about describing what makes those movies important to them, because those are the movies they grew up on.
Right. Yes, and that's definitely what has happened, is the fact that you do have this generation where that was their first theatrical experience to Star Wars, which there's nothing more impactful for my money than having your first experience with something like Star Wars be in the theater, in the darkened theater, surrounded by 7,500 whatever it is other viewers. And so that it's like me, for example, Return of the Jedi, for the original trilogy generation that were there for all three films in the theaters and were old enough to sort of appreciate them and remember them. Return of the Jedi is not generally thought of as the best.
This is true.
But
you know what?
For me, it's the best.
It's the best for you, for someone who is original trilogy generation.
Right.
On the latter end of it, though. I mean, you are Return of the Jedi generation, specifically.
I am. There's no question. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Specifically. Well, I got a little head start on you as far as that went. And the thing is, with my particular case being 8 years old when Star Wars debuted in 1977, 6 years later, I'm 14 and getting ready to go into high school. And Return of the Jedi is really the first time that any sort of elements that were directly pointed towards the kiddie crowd were becoming evident. And I'm talking about the scene in Jabba's palace.
Muppety, that's what you called it right here on this show.
Muppety.
You said it was a little Muppety.
And, of course, the Ewoks. Muppety. Both of which I love. And I've been, obviously collecting the action figures based on the characters from Jabba's palace for a really long time now.
No, you backed the barge, for God's sake.
I backed the flippin' barge. But just from the perspective of someone who grew up in that era, I'm getting ready to go into high school and everything, and Star Wars is presenting a lot of cuteness to me at that point in time, which I was easily able to sort of... I ignored it, I think. I kind of ignored how it felt silly to me after going through the grittiness and darkness of The Empire Strikes Back and just the beautiful debut of A New Hope. By the time you get to Return of the Jedi, you're dealing with song and dance numbers in Jabba's palace and teddy bears on the battlefield. And that kind of stuff is very well established in Star Wars mythos at this time, and I'm never pushing back. I'm not pushing back. Yeah. But I'm just trying to present you what the perspective was like for a 14-year-old in 1983, a 14-year-old boy in 1983. And to me, it felt like, well, Star Wars is coming to the end. I'm going into high school. This is all timing out perfectly. Because I would have maybe lost my connection to Star Wars through my high school years if they continued to make films that were saturated in that cuteness factor. As a matter of fact, they kind of did when you consider the Ewok
Well, I was
films.
just going to ask, okay, so 2 years later, 16-year-old Jimmy Mack, now he's cruising. Yeah. Now he's got he's got wheels.
Yes.
Are you staying at home and watching those Ewok movies?
I remember where I was the day Caravan of Courage debuted. Now that so many Star Wars fans have been to the Chicago area, they'll be familiar with what I'm talking about here, because I was a working man during my junior year of high school. And so that date that the Ewok film debuted on ABC, I was on the job that day making pizzas at Lou Malnati's.
Oh.
Me and Bill both made pizzas at Lou Malnati's in high school. We worked.
I'd weigh
in the kitchen.
500 pounds if I worked.
It was, yeah, we were taking them home a lot. And we still do know how to make them, too. And Bill was very good at making the thin pizzas. Everyone always talks about the deep dish at Lou Malnati's, but they also do make thin pizzas there. And it's pretty good. And Bill had a nice touch with those. Very light.
Bill
light.
still has the scars on his arms from burning himself on those ovens.
Well,
At least that's what he says.
He probably does. And there's another story about Bill at Lou Malnati's, about a maniac meth head who burst into the kitchen one night, grabbed him by the throat while he was on this rampage through the suburbs.
But Jimmy Mack is much better now.
True story. No, it wasn't. It was Bill. Oh, no, you're saying it was me, the meth head? No, I was not working at Malnati's at that time. I had moved on. I was in college by that point.
You said some maniac just came in and grabbed Bill by the throat. I just had to assume that maybe it was you.
He came busting in through the kitchen door and ran up. First person he saw was Bill, and Bill's over there flipping pizzas or whatever. Well, you don't flip pizzas, but you know what I mean. And so then he grabs Bill by the throat. And Bill's like, cool. Get your hands off me, loser. You know, he's trying to do the puppet Lando to break the tension.
Han! Still a chance to save Han! That's where the puppet Lando was born. People don't know. But it was the choke out from the meth head.
What? It sounds like hen.
Okay, but let's reel all this back in here. So that night I'm working at Malnati's. They were doing an FM simulcast of the Caravan of Courage.
Oh, come on. Are you kidding me? The audio only, of course.
Yes. And this was a promotion. Yes, this is a promotion ABC did, and they placed this simulcast on FM stations throughout the country. It was a syndicated thing. Wow. And I'd have to look up some of the facts about this because I'm only going off of memory right now. But there was a stereo FM simulcast of the audio of A Caravan of Courage when it debuted on ABC back in the mid-'80s. So I was making the pizzas at work and listening to the show. And it didn't hold my attention very well. It was hard to follow with just the audio. But
well, I can imagine.
It was cool to hear it. Didn't set the VCR for it or anything. Not that I recall. Maybe I did. I can't even remember, quite honestly. But
and you call yourself a fan.
I do. Well, but at this point, it was like the Ewoks, really, But I was interested enough to at least tune it in and listen to it a little bit.
I'll tell you, and this is going to come full circle. You're like wondering, where is this going? Jimmy Mack, Jason. Even as a 8-year-old, 9-year-old, by the time that hit the airwaves, I was old enough to watch it and kind of like it, but always looking for Han, Luke, or Leia to come around the next corner.
Yes.
Because I didn't know. I had no clue. I'm like, why aren't they there?
Right.
Because I'm looking at this as a sequel to Return of the Jedi. In my mind, I didn't understand the nuances of canon and chronology and all of that. But I was still old enough to go, this feels weird. Mm-hmm. I don't know about this. Mm-hmm. And that's, 8, 9-year-old with, the rose-colored glasses of youth and naivete. But still, they are just like the holiday special. I mean, obviously better than the holiday special, but they are wonderful little time capsules that certainly capture what it was like. It's a slice of fan life there in the 80s.
Are they streaming now?
No, but I'm hoping that they will with Disney Plus, because I actually haven't seen them since They did re-air at one point, and I'm trying to remember, on cable, but we're talking like early 90s, and that's the last. Maybe USA had them or something, and I remember seeing them, but I haven't seen them. I haven't seen them in 30 years.
Oh, here you go. You can watch the Ewok Adventure, Caravan of Courage, 1984. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. You have to rent it. You have to rent it.
Okay, yeah, you got to.
Or you can buy it. You can buy it standard def only. $8 to buy it, $2 to rent it. And so that's
great because those have been out of print on disc for quite a while. And I remember overhearing people at conventions looking for the discs, much like the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars. Those have been long out of print. But I cherish those because I really enjoy getting those. We are getting a little off track, which we do better than anyone on in podcasting. But I want to bring it back to Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman now looking back on the prequels, seeing how Star Wars is having this sort of third resurgence, you might say, and perhaps has a unique understanding to what backlash might be, and there certainly was some backlash with the last Star Wars movie. But she also has young children that are Star Wars fans, and you know what? I wouldn't be a bit surprised. I see her warming up. I mean, she is, after all, the mother, the grandmother of the Skywalker saga. I mean, she really is, as far as Star Wars moms are concerned, she's really it. She's the mother of the twins. She's the mother of she's the partner, spouse of the chosen one. I mean, we're talking a serious person. And it's very fitting that we're having this conversation here as we go into Mother's Day weekend. So for all of you mothers, this one is for you.
Do you remember your mother?
What about Mom?
Your thoughts dwell on your mother.
I saw my mother.
Come to see my mother.
Is my mother here?
Where are you going?
Find my mother.
Stay with me, Mom.
I have no memory of my mother.
I believe he's tooling with you, sir.
About his mother.
Thanks, Last Jedi, for the new addition to the montage. Much appreciated. I think it plays better in the montage than it does in the actual film, too.
I think it does, too. All right, let's go to the voicemails.
Jason. Hey, Jimmy. Hey, Star Wars fans. First time calling in. Just wanted to call and see what your thoughts are about future Star Wars celebrations as the saga winds down. Are there going to be future celebrations after the Anaheim celebration? I've missed the opportunity to go to the Chicago celebration, which I live in Dayton, Ohio, so I'm actually relatively close, but was just curious what your take was on that. Thanks a lot for all you guys do. May the Force be with you.
Now that's how you leave a voicemail. Short, sweet, to the point. Oh, that's fantastic. I think that the question really isn't about will there be more after Anaheim. I think Anaheim is sort of a reboot of what Star Wars celebrations are going to be down the line. We have been sort of following some of the behind-the-scenes goings-on with these conventions. We knew that there was a contract with Reed that was coming to a close.
After every one of these conventions, they always say, that's the last one on the contract with Reed. And then they go and announce another one. I mean,
this was it. This was it. When Reed signed up and was announced, they announced, I think, 3 or 4 conventions. And this is the last. This is the last one. This is it. This is it. There's no reason, especially with, and this gets to the heart of the question, especially with the opening of Galaxy's Edge now on 2 coasts in the United States, and I'm sure it's just a matter of time before some of the international Disney parks get some sort of version of the Star Wars land. With that kind of reach and that natural venue for something like Star Wars Celebration, I don't think we're going to be looking at an annual thing, but I think we'll be looking at a biannual or a triannual, or maybe they'll go, and this will go in between the D23 events, but it's all under the great big top of Disney now. They're going to be putting these shows on themselves. As I say, they've got the perfect venue. They've got the perfect attractions to draw fans. They don't need, I don't think they need, all of the typical trappings of a celebration. I don't think they need the huge exhibit halls. I don't even think, frankly, that they need, an endless parade of Star Wars celebrities. Not when you have an attraction like Disney World or Disneyland. So
no way, man. Well, I mean, how do you get, those theme parks are there for everyone. Yeah. These Star Wars Celebration events are for the hardcore fans. It's for the fans who are involved in the online communities and things, like us. And so I think that you still need to have that gathering of the tribes every few years with a Star Wars specific event. They've done it 13 times now, so it's obviously a proven winner.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying they're not going to do it anymore. What I'm saying is I think it's going to have a much different formula.
No, I don't think it's going to be the same as always. Comic-Con, essentially, just only Star Wars. That's what Star Wars Celebration is.
Yeah, I don't see it happening that way. I really don't.
I do. I say they're going to stick with the formula. Whether or not Reed Pop is directly involved, you did say that it's going to come under the Disney umbrella eventually. I believe that is true. But I do think Star Wars Celebration as a brand will continue. I like the idea of every other year. Surprising that they're going to squeeze in this one in 2020, but there must be an honest-to-goodness purpose for it, probably to really push the parks and the streaming service.
For sure. I was surprised at that, too, because I think this is the first time that we've ever seen back-to-back years Star Wars Celebration in the States.
In the States, yeah. It did hop over to Europe and Japan a couple of times in those down years. And I think that was sort of part of the programming. They wanted to do East Coast, West Coast, international.
But Jim, look what they were able to do with Star Wars weekends. They didn't have 75 actors from the films lined up. They'd get 3, 4,
right,
and have them in the parade. They didn't have massive dealer rooms or convention halls.
Yeah, but I mean that's what
drew
makes
a lot of people.
Yeah, but that's what makes Star Wars Celebration special. Is you do have those dealer halls and autograph halls and artist alleys and all that stuff.
I don't think Disney's going to want to junk up the park with that stuff. I think that's how they're going to see it.
Well, they wouldn't put it in the park. I mean, it wouldn't be in the park itself. It would be at the neighboring convention centers. It would be business as usual.
They don't own those convention centers. Where do they have D23?
Isn't that at the Anaheim?
That held?
In Orange County? Isn't that at the Anaheim Convention Center in Orange County? I was surprised that May the 4th came and went, and we didn't get any announcement. Yeah, D23 is at the Anaheim Convention Center. It was, here's one. No, it's at Anaheim Convention Center, and it's going to happen this August. Yeah, and that it's been there before. Now I don't know if they hop back and forth.
So they're every 3 years, aren't they? Or are they
every 2 years?
Every two.
Yes.
Interesting. So you got D23 this summer. Next spring,
no,
you have
the rumor I heard. Oh, that's what I was saying. Is that I was surprised that May the 4th came and went. I thought they would maybe announce the dates for Star Wars Celebration, and they haven't. And a lot of people are assuming it's going to be exactly 1 year. It's going to be in April. But what I heard is it's going to be August August in Anaheim next year.
So there you go. So you've got D23 in 2019, August 2019, and you're going to have Star Wars Celebration in August 2020. That could be the cadence that we're looking at in future years. D23 followed by Star Wars Celebration. That makes lots of sense. Though, I look for Star Wars Celebration, unlike D23, which I don't think D23 volleys back between the coasts, does it?
That's a good question.
I don't know enough about D23, but I do think that we're going to be looking at a volley back and forth between Anaheim and Orlando. I definitely think that that's going to be the case. The only point I was trying to make is that I think that Reed is out. I don't think they need a third-party convention organization to do it. They don't need it for D23. And I also think because you have so much more of an attraction in those cities and a certain, lure to get people there, you don't need much of an excuse. People go there anyway. Star Wars fans are going to go there anyway. So you call it Star Wars Celebration. You do it over a weekend. It's basically a glorified Star Wars weekends. That's what I think the future of Celebration is going to be.
I don't think so at all. I think you're way off on that one. I think it's going to just be business as usual. It's going to be the same convention format that we've seen. Yeah, I do. I really do. I think it's going to be the same. But the same but different. When the Disney programmers really sink their teeth into it, maybe there'll be some more variety. I've kind of seen Star Wars Celebration be a little repetitive over the last few years.
Yeah, you've actually been going through and watching the coverage that they did for StarWars.com.
Yes.
These daily reels. There's, 6-8 hours of this per day?
Amazing coverage. Absolutely amazing. I thought they did a great job with it. They had the Star Wars show stage there. And those guys, I just want to say something. Those guys from Star Wars show, they won a flippin' Emmy last week. They won an Emmy, and I think they deserve it. I've liked their red carpet coverage. I've liked their Star Wars Celebration coverage very much. I saw some jerk put online something saying, oh, the Star Wars show won an Emmy this week. I bet Rebel Force Radio is fuming over this. On the contrary, I think they do an awesome job. I mean, what a jerk to say something like that.
As if we're in some form competing with the Star Wars show or anything like that. I mean, that's not what we do here. The Star Wars show has its role to play. We have our role to play.
So congrats to them. And I have been watching their footage. And I think it's been, really excellent because you can be at that convention all day long for all 5 days and you miss like 80% of the convention.
Oh, absolutely.
85% of the convention,
Yeah, so if you've got the Celebration blues, some people are still suffering from this. That is a great way to not just relive it, but see the other 80% that you probably missed.
Yeah, and it's just been nice to have it on in the background, even panels that we attended, just to see it again. And it's a different experience all around. So it's just been nice to have that on the TV as I'm working on Rebel Force Radio stuff. And just to have that on in the background has been really excellent.
By the way, the voicemail that you just heard was left by one of our loyal Patreon supporters. In fact, all of the voicemails that you're going to hear this week on the program are from Rebel Force Radio Patreon members, and we would love to have you join our roster of supporters there at Patreon. You get exclusive Rebel Force Radio programming, shows like RFR Rush Hour, the Q&A, also early bird opportunities to listen to new episodes before anyone else, and the growing remastered archives of Star Wars Clone Wars Declassified. So if you're like me and you're going back and you're revisiting the Clone Wars in order to get ready for the big premiere in November on the Disney Plus, you might want to check out our roundtables, our declassified episodes, where we look and review each and every episode. Plus tons of other exclusives. It costs just $1. Join for just $1. You can customize that membership with multiple tiers to choose from. And Patreon members help keep Rebel Force Radio alive and well with minimal commercials per episode. We know you appreciate that. So please check it out. Patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio.
This is Eric from Phoenix, and I love being a Patreon supporter of RFR. Rush Hour is fantastic, and also the Q&A sessions are great to listen to as well. But my favorite part of being a Patreon supporter was the Patreon exclusive event at Alulu for Celebration Chicago. My wife and I had front row seats to that show, and I've never laughed as much or for as long as I did at that event. Keep up the great work, Jason and Jimmy, and if you're not a Patreon supporter, you're missing out.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
It's funny how this stuff happens. There I was today, minding my own business, as I normally do, working the day job, not even really thinking about anything, but sitting down with Jimmy tonight to do the show, playing some voicemail. I thought, it's probably going to be a laid-back show, no big news. And a friend of mine at the day job goes, what do you think about the new Star Wars movies? I said, well, they're all right. They're going to wrap up. They're going to wrap up here in December. She's like, no, I'm talking about the ones they just announced. I'm like, they just announced new movies. What are you talking about? So what she was referring to was the news from Variety. Disney announced the long-term Star Wars film release schedule. Now, Jim, this is something that has become a bit of a thing over the last 10 years because you have what they call these tentpole movies, right? You got the big blockbusters, and all the studios sort of jockey for position. Now, Disney jockeys with itself. They're jockeying the Marvel, the Star Wars, the Avatars, all this stuff. So they put this stuff out there. It's kind of like, it's kind of like marking your territory.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we've got December 2022. Don't even worry about putting one of your movies out there.
Oh, that is true.
Claimed it.
Yeah, they've got the big franchises hitting hard in December, and also, of course, with the recent acquisition by the studio of Fox, that has added things on their plate, like Avatar and all this stuff. So they really needed to get together and start strategizing. On the Lucasfilm end of things, we knew that an announcement was imminent, at least I did, because I caught this little moment of an interview Kathleen Kennedy did last month at Star Wars Celebration Chicago with MTV's Josh Horowitz for MTV News. And Kathy talked about how they were prepping to get into the legitimate strategizing of the planning stages for future Star Wars films.
We're using this appropriate time as an opportunity to see where we're going now that we're leaving the Skywalker saga behind. But there's no question that there's certain characters that we've created, certainly in the last 3 movies, that we may very well want to see down the line in the future. We also have huge opportunities with Disney Plus now to be able to look at that space and find perhaps even smaller stories, grittier stories, and yet Mandalorian, which debuts in November, has huge scope and scale. So we're just excited about what the potential is for the kind of things that we can do.
Knights of the Old Republic, a lot of fans want to see that. Is there any development of that?
We talk about that all the time. Yes, we are developing something to look at. Right now, I have no idea where things might fall, but we have to be careful that there is a cadence to Star Wars that doesn't start to feel like too much. We don't have a crystal ball. We tried a little bit with Solo to see if we could do 2 movies a year and whether or not there was really an opportunity for that. And we felt that's not going to work, so we backed off of that a little bit. But it doesn't mean we don't think about lots of different stories, because that's the exciting thing about this universe.
Damn, I can't believe she said that. I didn't hear that clip.
Wow.
That's the first time I heard it. That is, I got to hand it to her. And that is a really self-aware moment that she has. And there was no PR spin on that. Very interesting. Very interesting.
I thought so. So she indicated also to THR in a print interview that they were going to be hunkering down here in the month of May and laying out a game plan. So that's also part of the bigger picture for Disney. And so Star Wars obviously is one of those tent poles, like you said. So Disney made the announcement today about the future of Star Wars.
All right, yes, according to Variety, Disney announced that a trio of untitled Star Wars entries that will come after Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker brings the Skywalker spin-off saga to a close this December. The first of the 3 new films will hit the big screen on December 16th, 2022. 2 other follow-ups during the Christmas corridor on December 20th, 2024, and December 18th, 2026. Disney poised to dominate around the holidays for the foreseeable future as the studio is alternating between Avatar and Star Wars films every year through 2027, starting in 2021. In 2020, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story adaptation will bow on December 18th, while Cruella will launch December 23rd ahead of the long holiday. Didn't they already do a Cruella? That was the live-action 101 and then 102 Dalmatians. I don't know why we need just a standalone Cruella film. She's probably really that interesting without the puppies.
It's probably a live-action thing.
That's what I'm thinking. You think they'll bring Glenn Close back? Let's start it right now. The Cruella cast, right here. No, we're not going to talk about that, but I'm just curious about it. They're going to volley back and forth, like we were just saying with Celebration and D23. Now, Avatar has had an attraction at Disney in Orlando for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, but it was licensed. Just like Disney had been licensing Star Wars for the last 20-something years with Star Tours.
Oh, right. Yes, right. But now they have it proper with the acquisition of Fox, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
But this Avatar thing, we've been talking about this for a while. I have yet to see it. I know. I know. I'm waiting.
Somebody
sent
said
it to
online,
me.
They said they think the last non-Star Wars or Bond movie you've seen in the theaters is Titanic.
It might be true. It might be. No, I have young kids. So actually the last non-Star Wars or Bond film that I saw was The Incredibles 2.
Oh,
so, because I have to go see the movies with the kids.
You know what? Nowadays, you don't have to make any excuses amongst nerds for going to see The Incredibles. I mean,
I know. But what I'm saying is, those are the movies that actually, it might have been the Lego movie too. But those are the movies that I end up going to see. I know it's terrible. I've reached that age where 10:30 comes and I am like flat out asleep on the couch. Barely able to scrape myself off the sofa, get into the bed, and start the next day.
That's all. And why pay all that money to go to the movie theater just to fall asleep in the middle of it?
Oh, and those chairs! Are you kidding me?
Oh, they're so nice
give me a pillow and a blanket.
Oh, at least in the old days with those ass breaker seats in the theaters, they at least kept you focused.
Movie theaters that I saw movies in, there was no sleeping. There was no sleep. You had to keep your wits about you. In some of those, theaters.
So let's look at this.
Let's unpack this.
Let me give you my initial thoughts on seeing all this. I think it's just sort of funny the way fate has played such a hand in Star Wars owning the month of December in the new era. Because
that really jumped out at me, Jim. Right? Mm-hmm. Because it was like an accident.
It was
that they ended up in December.
They wanted to maintain the longtime Star Wars tradition of Memorial Day launches, having that big Memorial Day weekend box office smash Star Wars release. That's how they did it in the original trilogy era. That's how they did it in the prequel trilogy era. And that's what Bob Iger and Alan Horn wanted to do with The Force Awakens. But when the big shakeup happened and Michael Arndt was given his walking papers and they cut off lines of communication to George Lucas and J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan grabbed the ball and ran with it, then J.J. used his power as one of the most powerful creatives working in Hollywood these days. He used it to demand that he got an extension of time to bang out this new script with Kasdan. And that's why they moved the release date from May, which it was originally announced, May or summer. I think they were sticking with summer or spring. It was, I don't know if they actually had a release date. I can't remember that part.
I can't remember that either, yeah.
Something tells me they did, though. And so JJ demanded that they move it to December, and so they did reluctantly. They did so reluctantly. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to take advantage of the fiscal year of 2015 as the big payout on their $4.5 billion investment in Star Wars. They wanted to give their stockholders something to look at, and that was the time frame that they put on it. But JJ, wisely, luckily, who knows what we could have ended up with if the studio didn't back down.
Yeah.
There could have been some weird stuff in episode 7 if Abrams didn't really,
or
he at least
they might have had no choice to go with George and Arndt's script. Well, they didn't have a full script, but their treatment.
Yeah.
Well, Arndt had a
but then you know what? Then JJ probably said, "Well, then I'm out of here."
That could be.
That's how things work behind closed doors. Yeah. And whether you're a legend like George Lucas or not, there's big power plays going on in Hollywood. That city is notorious for that kind of thing. So who are we kidding to think that Star Wars film productions are immune from any of that? No, they're probably rife with that kind of thing. These are people wielding a lot of power. So JJ, luckily, was able to get the time he needed to flesh out The Force Awakens. So you find December then being owned by The Force Awakens. It becomes the #1 U.S. box office champ. The critical acclaim is great. Fans love it. The media loves it. And Iger is swimming in cash, which makes him very happy. Yeah. So they say, now we own December. That's Star Wars territory.
Yeah, and we can't underestimate the impact that the new merchandise hitting for that fourth quarter for the holiday season, that had a huge impact.
Yeah.
On the returns. Huge impact.
Yeah, but now we're dealing with the new era where merch, especially toys, is availability is becoming more and more limited, I think, at least in brick and mortar shops with the closing of Toys R Us and everything.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
People are growing more accustomed to downloading things when it comes to Star Wars than actually filling up a shelf or a room or a chicken barn in Petaluma, California. But I think the merch will always play a strong part in Star Wars. They just have to make the right merch, and that's something I think they've been failing to do.
Yes, and they have to have the right characters to make the merch of. You have to have a character that the kids want to buy a figure of. Kids and collectors, for that matter.
Yeah. How none of the aliens from The Last Jedi got made into plastic action figures. They had that entire Canto Bight sequence.
Yeah.
All of those crazy, wild aliens, and there was droids there. There was like a butler droid. There was all this stuff, this crazy. There was a turkey wearing a tuxedo, for Christ's sake. How you don't merchandise that stuff? They're like, well, we got the porgs. That's all anybody needs from this show.
It was a real half-hearted line of characters from that film.
And fans bitch and moan about those Canto Bight sequences so much. I think they would be much more accepting of it if there were action figures to collect from it.
Hey,
listen, a lot of
toys help. They make things better.
A lot of my perception and opinion of Star Wars Resistance, I've noticed this. This is like I'm putting myself to the test here. I'm in the laboratory, the fan laboratory, doing experiments on myself. And I noticed that when I acquired the action figures for Star Wars Resistance, the esteem of that show grew, in my personal fandom opinion, a lot. Just for having the action figures. I felt more connected than to the show on a Star Wars fan level because I had the action figures. Mm-hmm. And that's the backbone of my Star Wars collecting.
When you could hold, that's a great point, Jim. When you could hold the character in your hand, it made you want to know more about who they were.
Yes.
So then when the West End Games and the things came out that allowed you to do that, you're thinking, I always wondered where this guy came from, and now I know. And it was because of that tactile experience with the action. I absolutely agree with that. I think that has a huge. It also legitimizes the character. It's like it's not a real Star Wars character until it has an action figure. In my book.
So how they did take advantage of that holiday season and pump out a ton of those Canto Bite aliens before the film even comes out. Then people are there. They're in it. They have a grasp of it, at least on a collector's level and a kid level too. The kids are getting forgotten about. There weren't really fun action figures associated with The Last Jedi.
There's a bunch of boring humans.
Snoke, Poe. I mean, there weren't any crazy guys in armor. The Praetorian Guards, yes, those guys are cool. And there were a few others that they came out with, but not really colorful or compelling. Not enough to grab a kid's eye,
Right. And 35 Rose Ticos for every one of any other character.
3 different Rose Tico action figures were released. And not a single Canto Bite alien. That's a bummer, man. That's a total bummer.
Where were those horses? Like, why wasn't there a beast pack with what were those creatures called?
The Fathiers.
Yeah, the Fathiers. Why not a Fathier with a rose and a fin packed in there? No Fathier.
Nothing. So, I just think that as visually stunning as all of that stuff was, it should have been immortalized in the plastic tradition of 3 3/4-inch action figures that makes Star Wars, to me, it makes the backbone of collecting on a profound level, because like I said, it takes me back to my childhood in a way that the way I initially connected with these films is through the merch, through the toys and the action figures, specifically the 3 3/4-inch action figures. So that, nowadays I might be like Grandpa talking about playing with the tin airplanes when he was a boy.
That's so funny you say that, because I have thought about that. If you've ever gone to a flea market or, a garage sales or anything where you see those toys, watch A Christmas Story and see the stuff that Ralphie and Randy open up on Christmas morning.
Oh boy,
the Zeppelin!
The Zeppelin! It's so funny. That's so funny. When me and Billy Mack were at the Kane County Toy Fair just this past weekend, we spotted a Zeppelin, exactly what Ralphie's little brother pulled out of the box. And I pointed, I said, a Zeppelin. And it said on it, Graf Zeppelin. God, you know what? I should have stopped and maybe poked around at that little piece of memorabilia there. I should, you know what? Why don't I have one?
Why don't you have one?
I'm notorious for loving Led Zeppelin, and I don't have a Zeppelin. Me and Steve Glosson, we do a show about Led Zeppelin called Rock Out Led.
Wow.
Yeah,
Rock
and since Steve got married, so he can't rock out with me anymore. That dust will settle. It
always does.
Yeah,
it always does.
We'll be
how long did it take? How long did it take Wilkins before he was ready to do another Bond cast? About 2 months.
I don't even. Have we even recorded?
Oh no, we have. We did after the wedding, and then we did after the baby.
All right.
He's always game, but the bloom gets off that rose pretty fast. But anyway, of course, our voicemails.
Don't say that.
Our voicemails filled up very quickly after the news broke about 3 new Star Wars movies. So,
hey, Jason and Jimmy, this is Dan Larson from Utah. Hey, I just saw the news drop earlier today that there's going to be 3 new films coming out starting in 2022, and I was just curious to get your guys' thoughts on that. Whose films these are going to be, where these might land as far as timeline, things of that nature. But anyway, thanks for the podcast, and keep up the good work.
I have a theory about this because there's two competing trilogies that have been bandied about and spoken of, and there's the Rian Johnson trilogy,
yes,
and there's the Benioff and Weiss, the duo behind Game of Thrones,
right. And we know that's happening because we've heard from multiple sources that the Benioff Weiss production is greenlit and pretty much underway right now.
But my theory is that it's possible that these two forces, Rian Johnson and his crew, and the Benioff and Weiss, they're in some sort of a race.
They're in a race.
Sort of a competition.
Well, who's to say they're not working on the same project? Maybe Benioff and Weiss are producing the project while Rian is directing it. Has anybody ever thought of that?
I haven't thought of that. That would certainly save face because, look, my feeling is whether you love The Last Jedi or you hate The Last Jedi, I think that Rian Johnson is damaged goods. I don't think the public at large is going to rush to the theaters to see a Rian Johnson written and directed Star Wars film. However, if it's got the endorsement and if it's got the involvement of Benioff and Weiss coming off the high that is the Game of Thrones, that's a different story. That's a different story. Because no one's doubting Rian Johnson's abilities as a director. I didn't walk out of The Last Jedi or I'm not looking back on The Last Jedi right now doubting his abilities as a director. I'm doubting his abilities as a writer. I'm doubting his abilities as someone who can grab the baton and run with it in a way that makes complete sense. But as a filmmaker, as a guy who understands the mechanics of making movies and that sort of thing, I'm not doubting his talents there. So if you got a Benioff and Weiss that are making sure that, this is a story that makes sense and is consistent with what's been done before, why not?
Well, Benioff and Weiss, they're obviously known for their production skills and writing skills. But when it comes to directing, the two of them only directed 2 episodes of Game of Thrones up until this season. I think they might be directing the series finale, if I remember hearing correctly. But I did look it up because I was interested to know what their director status was. I knew that they had some experience directing, but they only directed 2 episodes of Game of Thrones. So that's when I started to consider, well, maybe Rian is working on a Star Wars trilogy. And we do know Benioff and Weiss are, but maybe it's the same trilogy.
Yeah, that's a really good theory. It's quite possible. I don't think it was ever mentioned that it was definitely 2 different projects.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there were 2 different announcements. And we've only heard Bob Iger talk about the Benioff and Weiss duo. And we've only heard Kathleen Kennedy talk about Rian Johnson. Right. So you have one side saying this, another side saying that. So we're naturally in the middle, kind of like a ping pong ball. And so I saw some people giving you, specifically, Jason, criticism for doubting Rian Johnson's future involvement in the Star Wars franchise. But I don't think that's fair for anyone to criticize someone questioning or doubting that because of the fact we're hearing 2 different things.
Yeah. Here's what I think that Kathleen Kennedy she's going to stand by her guy. She's not going to. She may, like we heard in that last clip about Solo and the cadence of the release of the film, she may be willing to sort of eat that crow a little bit. One thing she's not going to do is she's not going to publicly indicate any regret about Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson was her boy. He gave her the movie that she wanted, rightly or wrongly, but she's the boss, so you gotta say, if he pleased the boss, then you did something right. He didn't deliver the movie. I don't think that at least 50% of the fans out there wanted.
I have to pull up a story here. I referenced it earlier in the show when I talked about Kathleen Kennedy talking to the Hollywood Reporter at Star Wars Celebration. It was a print interview, so I don't have any audio to play. But Kathleen Kennedy said, quote, "This is the culmination of the Skywalker saga. It is by no means the culmination of Star Wars. I'm sitting down now with Dan Weiss and David Benioff and Rian Johnson. We're all sitting down to talk about where do we go next. We've all had conversations about what the possibilities might be, but now we're locking it down."
Wow.
I think they're all working on the same damn project.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Wow.
Because how do you involve Rian Johnson's project when December is locked down with Star Wars, the next trilogy, and Avatar? There's no breathing room there. They've already said they're not going to put out 2 films a year. They've made it clear that it's all slowing down, and that Kathy says the cadence and all this. So that's what I'm beginning to assume. I'm surprised we didn't get this sort of information with this press release that came out this week about the future scheduling of the films. I mean, there's nothing attached to it. It's just untitled. Here's the date. That's all you know. But I'm led to assume that Benioff and Weiss are definitely involved in the project that was announced today. Where does Rian Johnson's trilogy fit into this? I think it's the same trilogy. I really do. I think they're going to try to blend as many concepts together coming from these two sources, see if they can make it work, come up with something cohesive, and build this trinity of Star Wars creatives to carry the trilogy forward. You know, a trinity for the trilogy. So why weren't they announced then?
Yeah.
Because that has not yet been settled. Can they work together? Do they want to work together? I think the choice will come down to, if the choice is being laid out there, and again, I'm presuming all of this, if the choice is there, Rian, do you want to direct the Benioff and Weiss trilogy? You hired me to do my own thing, and I've spent a lot of time working on all of this. Is there anything we can do with this? Well, maybe we can find elements to incorporate into this thing. Then Rian goes, well, do I want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, then push comes to shove, and hard decisions have to be made. If Rian feels like he signed up for something vastly different, then he might resist. And then they'll say, okay, well, then see ya.
Right. You know, something that I'm sort of struggling with is, and I went back and I started reviewing some of the initial media stories that hit after the acquisition of Lucasfilm by Disney, and the discussion surrounding a new trilogy, starting with Episode 7. And I cannot find, up until post Episode 8, and I mean probably within the last 6 to 10 months, any reference to the end of the Skywalker saga. I'm still struggling with this.
Yeah, I had a hard time with that.
Saga.
Last summer, yeah, I just felt like they were just throwing in the towel. Because, like I said, I wanted the 12-part saga. That's what I wanted. That's always been the Star Wars mythology, behind-the-scenes mythology has always told us that was George's original intention for a story to stretch over 12 films, a family story. And then on the other side of the coin, I'm like, well, maybe it is a good time to wrap it up for Skywalker, at least for now. It can always come back. I mean, George said he wasn't going to do the prequels for forever.
Well, right. I mean, I suppose, I guess it begs the question to me, well, who asked for it to end? Like, I don't understand this, or why do you even have to necessarily say that it's the end? Just make some more movies. And instead of, I have this issue with where they've got these new movies announced. They're drawing a line in the sand. They're saying this is the end of the Skywalker saga. So we're going off and doing this thing, and it's going to be something else, something within the Star Wars universe, but something else. And I maintain that there are certain elements that you have to have in order for it to be a Star Wars movie and recognizable as being in that universe.
Okay,
and
this is what's
going to always have to tie back in some way. I don't necessarily mean to Luke Skywalker, but there's certainly going to have to be Jedi or bounty hunters or all of the above, smugglers. All of the above have to be in it.
That is what's happening in creative meetings in California as we speak. They're behind closed doors and they're having these discussions. What must be in a Star Wars movie? Not specific characters or even specific planets or even specific ideologies and things like separatists and First Order and all that stuff. None of that stuff. But what do you have to have? And so they're probably standing in front of a dry erase board writing down, the Force would be the first thing I would say.
Right.
The Force.
Check.
Oh, yes. Okay. Number one. Yes. The Force. There were two. Cool space battles. Yes.
Check.
So here we go. So we keep going on and on. But do you want the Jedi to be part of this? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, then how do you have the Force if you don't have Jedi?
Well, it depends on
the anchor.
Well, it depends on where in the timeline they place it.
Well, the Jedi have been around for over 1,000 years,
and it could,
1,000 generations.
It could depend on what kind of net are they going to cast. Is it going to be a really big story involving things on a galactic scale, or is it going to be a smaller story involving people on an adventure? Things like that. Like the Indiana Jones films. Those are high adventure, great stakes, huge characters we care greatly about, but what happens in those movies don't affect what happens in society, really. Well, when you talk about things like UFOs and stuff, I mean, that gets a little weird. But I mean, really, it's just like an individual on his own adventure, as opposed to anything that has to do with like the galactic ruler and of the galaxy and all of that stuff, where the stakes are.
Here is one of my chief concerns is that I think for the general public, the general movie-going public, the appeal of a Star Wars film is that it is a multi-generational story. It is myth. It is the stories now that grandparents are telling their grandchildren. They're experiencing these movies, the original movies, the sequels, the prequels, all of it. Because there is a core mythology to it. And once you deviate from that, once you go out from that, I think you've got a niche film that is going to appeal to a diehard set of fans. I just don't see there being this mass clamor to see a story set within the Star Wars universe that doesn't involve the main or tie back in some way.
All right, what about ancient Jedi? And that's been brought up, obviously, because of the Benioff and Weiss connection to crazy medieval fantasy.
Right.
You just say,
they'd be perfect, right? They'd be the perfect choice. Yeah.
What if it is like a Game of Thrones Star Wars mashup at the end of the day, steeped in Star Wars mythology and history and everything, of course, but it still has that medieval fantasy flair.
Yeah, I think that it's possible. If you collect people like Benioff and Weiss and you put them at the helm of Star Wars, you're still, in my judgment, creating something that is really exciting for fans of genre films. And maybe that's the future of Star Wars. Maybe Star Wars is not going to continue to be this mainstream phenomenon that, unites people from all over and
I think
walks
with
of life.
Disney staking claim on December the way they want to in the holiday season, I think that they're definitely going to be positioning Star Wars to be as big as it's ever been, with aspirations to make it bigger than it's ever been, with the parks and these new movie releases, and then like the smaller stuff, the more individualized stories, like the one I was talking about. That's more streaming series kind of fodder. And so I think with all of this going on, I see Star Wars just getting bigger and bigger. I don't see it taking a step back at all. And I expect things on a huge epic scale to come from this next trilogy that's just been announced. It's just
I think that they want to. I think they want to move. It is fun. I mean, I think they want to move forward. I would be very surprised if this next trilogy in 2022 through 2026 looks back at all. Now, that's not to say that we heard earlier from Kathleen Kennedy that they're definitely looking at Knights of the Old Republic. They're definitely looking at something that takes place, perhaps 500, 800 years, before A New Hope. I mean, we knew from George Lucas himself, he had said that he had thought about a Yoda story. Wouldn't that be interesting? And now that's something that could anchor. I keep talking about this anchor. I think that, we heard Jon Favreau talking about if you want to introduce new characters, you have to surround them with the context of the familiar so that people are reminded that I'm paraphrasing, of course, that they're in the Star Wars universe. I think it's the height of arrogance and taking this lightning in a bottle for granted. Nobody if you think that all you have to do is slap on a Star Wars logo.
Nobody is. And that's why they're taking it seriously. Now, if they were going to keep up and just be bullheaded and maintain with that 2-film-a-year thing and just keep pumping it out left and right, then I would agree. But seeing that Iger pulled back on the reins and used the word hiatus, and we're seeing an obvious example of that hiatus being put into place. They are giving themselves time to step back, reevaluate.
Are they really?
Yes.
Are they really?
Yes.
Are they really? So if this movie is coming out in December 2022, when do you think cameras need to roll on it?
Probably in spring or summer next year.
Yeah.
But
how much time is that, really? I don't think it's changed at all. I don't think that the cadence has changed at all.
Well, what has been under development in pre-production? What has been banged out script-wise, etc.? Do they have to wait for Benioff and Weiss to be finished with Game of Thrones to move forward and find their starting point? No, I think that starting point has already come and gone. I think development on this new trilogy has been underway for a while.
Well, then Kathleen Kennedy standing there talking to Horowitz saying that, right now we're talking about the future. No, she means a year ago we were talking about the future, and things looked very different 1 year ago.
Yes. Well, that's because they wanted, I just think that they're two different forces, no pun intended, at work here when it comes to the announcement about the Rian Johnson trilogy and then the announcement about the Benioff and Weiss series of films. That's how it was originally presented to us. I think that's Kathleen Kennedy playing her hand and Bob Iger playing his hand at the same time. Again, I'm talking about what goes on behind closed doors in Hollywood, and I'm only making assumptions. But that's just how it feels to me, because it's been just such a mixed message about what is. I'll just say this, mixed message or not, I am immediately drawing the conclusion that these three films, the release dates for these three films correlate with the project that Benioff and Weiss are working on. That's what I say.
I agree. I have no doubt. I think this is the Benioff and Weiss project. I think that postulating that Rian Johnson could be directing one or all of these movies is spot on.
Maybe.
No confirmation.
No, I mean, that comes down to Rian, if that actually has been presented to him.
Right.
It would come down to him.
The earliest PR about a Rian Johnson trilogy was that, this guy was given a blank slate.
Yes.
This guy was, you're talking about chosen one. This was the guy that was going to bring it all together. In fact, he was the first director since J.J. Abrams to not be fired by Kathleen Kennedy on a Star Wars project. So this was the guy. He kept peace on the set. Everybody loved him. The movie came in on time. No issues there. He was the one, and they were going to give him, to reward him, before the movie came out, before anybody saw this thing, they awarded him his own trilogy. I mean, think about that. Think about that payday. Not just the financial return on something like that, but the fact that, oh man, you did such a bang up job on this thing, even though only 30 people have seen it. We're going to give you your own trilogy. And that happens a lot. I mean, I remember, think of that Green Lantern stinker that Ryan Reynolds did several years ago. I heard that they had they greenlit a sequel on that thing before it even came out.
Yeah, maybe. I don't remember.
Well, that was a story that they did.
It wasn't too bad.
Yeah, but I mean, they didn't do the sequel, and Ryan Reynolds ended up, perfectly happy with his Deadpool. But the point being is that, as we just talked about, these movie schedules are put out 5, 6, 7, 8 years in advance, and they're making promises and guarantees and deals before these people are actually proven, or their product is actually proven. And I think that's exactly what's happened here with Rian Johnson. I think if there's a way to shoehorn him in to this project, if he wasn't part of it to begin with, they're going to do. I think that this is the one thing that they will never, ever, ever, ever indicate or show any kind of buyer's remorse on is Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi. They will never publicly do it. They'll throw Solo under the bus. They'll throw the cadence under the bus, but they will never do that to Rian Johnson.
So do we have any more voicemail response to this big news that broke this week?
Yeah, we sure do. Here, let's talk to Jared from Springfield. Take it away, Jared.
Hey, Jason and Jimmy. This is Jared from Springfield, Virginia. I'm elated over the news of one Star Wars film every 2 years from 2022 to 2026. Selfishly, I was worried about Star Wars burnout with yearly theatrical releases, but I think this model leaves a lot of room for speculation in the interim. I also think it really allows Disney Plus to flourish with respect to Star Wars, where in the odd years we can have live action, animation, or even direct to Disney Plus Star Wars film, even though Iger has said he is not interested in that. Whether this is Rian Johnson or Benioff and Weiss over those years is something I really haven't figured out yet, although personally I'm leaning toward Benioff and Weiss based on them seemingly being favored by Lucasfilm and Disney when it comes to dropping announcements and keeping their names in the news. Love what you guys do. Can't wait to hear you guys react to the news.
Well, thanks, Jared. Appreciate that very much. And I think we've covered a lot of that right here. We've unpacked it. I think Jimmy throwing in the idea that perhaps they've been working on the same project all along. That's interesting.
No, I didn't say all along. I'm just saying that could be.
Oh,
that could be a new wrinkle.
That's more along the lines of what I think. I think that they're throwing Rian Johnson on top of this project as a way to save face.
Well, maybe. But
they didn't back the wrong horse.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was saying Rian could have been working on his own thing and establishing his own story, and then they're in a situation now where Iger has called for a hiatus and a slowdown. And so now what are you going to do? You have two guys, two different camps that you have granted films to. So I think that's the smartest move, is try to bring them together. I mean, it could be an incredible collaboration. I mean, it could be just completely off the charts, perfect for everyone. So, right. But again, ego does come into play. And it might be hard for someone like Rian, who was planning on doing his own thing and who was definitely sitting in the driver's seat for episode 8 the whole way through, from script to screen. then it might be hard for him to have to trash what he'd been working on before to adapt to a different project.
We could just be looking at a cinematic version of the expanded universe.
Well, I mean, that's a very easy thing to say. And a lot of those expanded universe books I thought would have made incredible movies. So, I don't understand if that is a good thing or a bad thing in your opinion. But, George Lucas isn't going to be around anymore to be writing and working on these films. And so you're just going to have to accept that other people are going to carry the torch forward, or we don't get anything.
Well, hey, look, as long as it's grounded in the core of what makes Star Wars, I'm fine.
Listen, maybe this will make you feel better. Because there's another player, I think, who's in the mix in this camp of Benioff and Weiss and Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson. I think there's another player involved, and his name is Jon Favreau. And I think he'll have something to do with future Star Wars films.
Well, that I would celebrate. I'm extraordinarily excited about The Mandalorian. I've made no bones about that. I have been for a long time. You can go back 10 years in our Star Wars podcasts. And back when George was talking about his, the maker himself was talking about 1313 or what was going to be 1313, his live action TV series. He's like, I would do a TV series. It's not going to be about anybody that you've ever heard of.
Yeah.
It'll be about background characters, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And I was sketchy about that too. I said, well, how far background until it's no longer Star Wars?
So you get to the Weequay janitor.
The Weequay janitor. That was a meme we had on the show. It's like, I'm not interested in that. I want to see this. This is always going to have some sort of touchstone to, look at the new Harry Potter movies. These, what is this? The Grindelwald or whatever it is.
Fantastic Beasts.
The Fantastic Beasts. That whole thing. Well, guess who shows up? Young Dumbledore, right? You gotta throw that in. You always have to somehow find a way to tie it back. That's all I'm saying. Stop all of this grandstanding about the past needing to die and the end of the Skywalker saga and move on and, get out of our house. Stop all of that and give us some reassurance that the legacy, the Lucas legacy of Star Wars is going to be preserved here. Well, not interested in the latest and loudest.
When it's medieval Star Wars in the next trilogy and a teenage Yoda shows up.
Yes.
In episode 2.
Yes, that is how to do it. That is how to do it. That's how to do it, because you have to, in my judgment, you have to have something appear on screen at some moment that you go, oh. And then you start to think about, well, that person, and then Luke, and then Vader, and Palpatine. Oh, like that's what they'll never escape that.
That's what
if
Jason
we get to the point where we cannot, like I said last week, if we're at the point where we cannot, as fans, agree that the benchmark from which all future Star Wars stories are going to be judged is the original trilogy and those characters, then I've got a problem with it. Yeah. I've got a real problem with it. That always has to be the core. That was the start of it. That is the nucleus of it. And I'm not naive. I don't think that there's not a future. I don't believe that there's no future of Star Wars without those characters and those situations. But I do think that there always has to be some thread that connects it all together.
Yes. And this is what Jason said before the prequels came out. This is what Jason said before the Clone Wars show came out. This is what Jason said. Now that we're recording all this, we can just go and rewind now. It'll just be like, here's what Jason said before Rebels came out. Core characters have to be. Here's what Jason said before The Force Awakens.
And what did they do? And
Core
what did they do? And what did they do? Look who they trot out for the Clone Wars trailer, the teaser trailer. How many teaser trailers do we need where the screen goes black and you hear Darth Maul again? It's not a surprise anymore.
Darth Maul is
It's not
awesome.
a surprise. I love Darth Maul. But I mean to tell you,
He's
like,
a core
good
character,
God.
though. Now, see, you're contradicting
No,
yourself.
I'm not. I'm not contradicting
core
myself
character.
one bit. I'm not I'm talking about the fact that we get it. We get it. But how many trailers do we have to see where the screen goes black and you just hear the voice of Darth Maul and everybody goes, ah! Well, I mean, you do that 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and it's like, okay.
The trailers have just become so cliched and typical all the time with the sad piano. They were doing it for the Clone Wars trailer. When is that trend going to end? Is this just going to happen forever now? I mean,
can you please put Darth Maul on the shelf with the sad piano?
God, I was watching
because it's not shocking anymore. Of course, Darth Maul's going to be. He's going to be in everything.
I was watching the Episode 1 trailer at the panel that we went to for the 20th anniversary of Phantom Menace. And that thing had like George Lucas wipes and dissolves in it and stuff. And it just had classic John Williams music in the background with Star Wars sounds and dialogue. It wasn't all this like, you know, with the ting, ting, ting,
yeah, right.
ting, ting.
That's right.
Ting, 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 ting. You know, it's just it's so over the top, and it's the same production. I swear they have a template, and they just mix up a bunch of clips, drop it into the template, and off they go.
Right. Cue the black screen and throw in the creepy Darth Maul voice. You know, as if it's a surprise that he's coming back. Jeez, would somebody just kill this guy once and for all?
It's cliche. Now, listen, No, because you are dealing with a blank spot in Darth Maul's history, a story that was meant to be told in the Clone Wars, and it wasn't because the show got canceled. His story ties in greatly with the Jedi defeating the Mandalorian, the Death Watch specifically, or whatever, you know, whatever the Death Watch then evolved into under Darth Maul's rule when he created that syndicate. That
no
story
doubt,
needs to
no
be told.
doubt.
That
but
Darth
I mean,
Maul story needs to be told. And there's,
if you're going to shock me. Look, if you're going to shock me in a trailer, you got to do better than Darth Maul.
But it's about finishing that story. I don't think it's necessarily about presenting new stuff when it comes to Clone Wars. And we have some clips of Filoni. I don't know if we're going to get to him this week, but I hope we do, because he talks about specifically Darth Maul coming back.
All right. Well, let's jump over to Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill was cornered by the people over at Reuters, and they asked him about Peter Mayhew. So here is Mark Hamill talking about the loss of Peter Mayhew.
He didn't set out to be an actor. He was an orderly in a hospital, and they found him for a film that Ray Harryhausen was doing, one of the Sinbad films. And he was tall enough to fit into whatever outfit they wanted. So it was quite by chance. You know that Ted Cassidy, Lurch from the original Addams Family, was cast as Chewbacca.
Oh, really?
But he was an American, and the British Union said, look, if he's going to wear a mask, you got to hire somebody that's from England. And they said, we'd love to find us somebody who's over 7.5 feet tall, and we will. And they found Peter Mayhew. But what was so remarkable about him was his spirit and his kindness and his gentleness was so close to what a Wookiee is. Mm-hmm. Sure, they're fierce animals, but they're like your family dog. There's no one more loving and the unconditional love than the family pet. And Peter was like that. He just radiated happiness and warmth. He was always up for a laugh, and we hit it off immediately and stayed friends for over 40 years.
Wow. That seems to be the common sentiment about Peter Mayhew, friendships that lasted for over 40 years. And Mark is no exception to that. And, I was talking to, over the last couple of days, of course, being the resident Star Wars fan, at your place of work, people come up and they offer condolences to you.
Yeah.
As if you lost, someone in your family, which in a way we have.
Yeah.
And, but I feel almost, I understand people's motivations and it's all fine and it's sweet and all, but it's like, well, I'm not really deserving of your condolences, but, throughout the conversations, people that are not necessarily experts in any of this stuff, they were talking about Chewbacca and how, the way he ran, the way he walked, the way he shrugged, there was a lot of Chewie shrugs and tilted the head and all that stuff. And what I was really heartened about was the fact that they realized that there was an actor in there, that he wasn't,
what do you think? It was
a prop.
Oh, I see.
Well, no, that he wasn't a prop.
Some movie magic happening there, like the stop motion or something.
Well, that they didn't take it for granted. They understood that was somebody, that there was that it was the same guy in that suit for certainly those 3 films. They might not have known that he came back for the prequels or, even aware that Chewbacca was in the prequels. But there is a consistent performance from Peter Mayhew, the actor, throughout those original films. And, they got it. I liked that. There was no surprise. Oh, really? Was it the same guy in all those movies? That never came up. That never came up. And, Jim, you and I, we've talked about, as kids growing up and becoming aware of how movies are made through Star Wars and, learning what, who actors were and all of that. I mean, that roster, the Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew, like that roster of actors was so burned on our brains growing up that there was never any room for doubt that was an actor behind that performance.
Right. And we had such limited exposure to them, too. It wasn't until the age of the conventions when we actually got to know them for the people they are. But outside of random interviews, and it's not like people were beating down their door to talk to them for the most part. Sure, there were the Star Wars magazines and Starlog and publications like that, but so many pages in those magazines, how much can you get to know a guy? It was when they started going to the conventions, when you really got exposed to them. They would do the panels, or in Peter Mayhew's case, I would stalk him for years and years with microphones. And thank you, everyone who reached out to me last week. It was Thursday night when we got the news that Peter had passed away. And I was in my studio and I got word of it early, so I immediately started rummaging through folders of files and pulling up old material and listening to it again, and really just by myself having kind of these moments, heartfelt moments about Peter and just the type of guy he was. And so a lot of people reached out, and they were grateful that I was putting them up on our YouTube channel. And then we did the Remembering Peter Mayhew special, which compiled a lot of those old interviews that I did with him. And so I think a lot of people were touched by all of that and were able to get to know Peter a little bit better from his appearances on our shows. Hey, something interesting about that Mark Hamill clip, though, is something I never knew. He throws out a bit of trivia there that never came across my desk as far as I know. It could be in a Rinsler book, but he said Ted Cassidy, who was Lurch in the Addams Family, was originally hired to do the role, but the unions in London wouldn't allow that. I find that really interesting that Lurch was under consideration to be Chewie, and Lurch was a little bit smaller. Ted Cassidy just a little bit shorter than Peter. Peter was at his height, at his peak height, he was, I think, 7'4". I've also seen reports of 7'2", but I believe when he was at his peak, he was 7'4", and Lurch, Ted Cassidy, was 6'9". Still, I mean, pretty huge, big enough to play Chewbacca in my book. But unfortunately, with Ted, he passed away in 1979. Complications from open heart surgery.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't have been able, due to
46 years old.
Yeah, due to his poor health, he wouldn't have been able to carry along the legacy of Chewie. I mean, my God, if he needed open heart surgery in 1979, then he probably wasn't up to the task of playing the role in 78 when they were shooting, or 79 when they were shooting Empire. Well, for sure, if he was dead, he was dead.
Right.
So, I never knew that, though.
I didn't know that either. I didn't know. I mean, a lot of people may actually, if they don't remember his face, it's hard to think of people who don't remember Lurch from the original Addams Family. But it was also a big player in animation as a voice actor at the Hanna-Barbera studios.
Yeah.
Did a lot of that stuff, from the Super Friends. Frankenstein Jr. was one I remember. He was Brainiac in the Super Friends. And brother Billy Mack would probably be sitting here saying, oh, yeah, and he was also in The $6 Million Man as Bigfoot.
Sure. Those were epic. When those episodes aired of The $6 Million Man, that was epic stuff, man. I mean, kids were locked into that story when that was happening. That's what I was the biggest fan of prior to Star Wars, was $6 Million Man. He was the one. I mean, because they had the toys and everything, and it was Kenner. It was Kenner making those toys and stuff. But interesting.
I never heard that before. Wow, he was actually cast as Chewbacca.
Well, maybe if we're saying he was cast, I think Mark said that he was originally supposed to play him. So maybe it never even got that far. But, Mark would know. And so that was an interesting piece of trivia, and also a nice thing he had to say about Peter, too.
Yeah, for sure. No question. Speaking of Mark Hamill, we aired last week some clips of him speaking to the Hollywood Reporter podcast, hosted by Scott Feinberg over there. And I think it's called Awards Chatter or something like this. And Mark was on there promoting Nightfall. One of the clips we didn't get to is Mark actually theorizing about whether or not Luke really died at the end of The Last Jedi. So here is Mark and his theory.
Someone said, well, how come his hand, when he disappeared, his hand didn't fall onto the rock? Because it's inorganic matter. And I said, see, it proves my theory that Luke left his robes behind and teleported to a nudist planet. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
Right.
But I'm just having fun. I mean, you don't know, because we can't talk about 9, so who knows?
But I think you have said that during Nightfall, you may have been engaged with another film project.
Right.
But we'll wait to see. But unless you feel like getting some unburdening yourself of anything.
Well, people know I'm in 9, so it's not a big surprise.
No, that casting was announced a while ago, and we also knew that Mark was signed for 3 movies. That was part of the some of the initial chatter before The Force Awakens even came out.
Mark was ready to dive off the deep end there, though, with Scott Feinberg, but he pulled himself up right at the last minute. Said, but that's episode 9. We really can't talk about that.
For sure. So anyway, well, Mark is a good one. He's certainly learned the J.J. Abrams adage of loose lips sink starships, which was plastered all over the set of episode 7. He's probably brought some of that back with 9. But, with each one of these films, there have been, I think, fewer and fewer episode 7 just leaked like a sieve. Episode 8 was a lot less. And episode 9, I feel like, is even less so.
Absolutely.
They've really dialed it back.
Yeah.
Mark Hamill, not the only one talking to the press. John Boyega was at Star Wars Celebration, of course, and was speaking to Josh Horowitz. And the question came up about who gets luckier, Finn or Lando?
Lando is definitely more of a ladies' man, but I think Finn is way on his way to being a ladies' man for sure. But Finn is different. Finn's charisma is a bit more chilled. Lando, The guy is just swagged out with the cloak, the yellow shirt. I love it. I love it.
Yellow shirt. Yellow shirt. Enough of this yellow shirt. Somebody get John Boyega a copy of The Empire Strikes Back.
Dude, in the movie he's in with Lando. Lando's wearing a yellow shirt, so that applies to when John Boyega is talking about it. He's not making
baby blue, man.
He's not making a definitive statement. Anyway, so what? I still don't understand why you're so bent out of shape about that. But hey, you know.
If anything, Donald Glover should be evoking Billy D. Williams, not Billy D. Williams evoking Donald Glover.
No, but I think Glover put a lot of Billy D. into his performance.
Yeah, I know.
I know he did.
Just
I know
cranky.
He did. You're cranky, man. All right, well, how about let's hear a little bit about The Mandalorian. You're pumped up about that, aren't you?
I'm totally pumped up about that. Yeah, Werner Herzog. The actor that we saw he doesn't appear in the trailer, I don't believe. But,
I can't.
No, we saw him in the clip.
Right.
So what do we got here? We've got him talking to the AP.
Yeah. He's talking to the Associated Press in these new clips, and he just sort of discusses how he kind of fell into the role in The Mandalorian.
Mandalorian, I was invited by Jon Favreau, who started this whole series, to act. I looked at the screenplays, and I had the feeling, although I know very little about Star Wars, I had the feeling, yes, I could do it. It's a character in whom you cannot trust. And I said, yes, I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, here's a guy that doesn't really know much about Star Wars as a universe, as a what the stories are. Obviously, he knows of Star Wars. You can't work in that industry, in that business, and not. Well, you really can't be a person on the planet Earth, really, and not know something about Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
He's not steeped in the lore.
Play cut 3. Let's hear what his favorite Star Wars film is.
Okay.
I have to confess I never saw a single one. I've seen some trailers, I've seen some excerpts here and there, and I know about the whole franchise and about the toys for the kids, and so it's all a new mythology. Our time is some sort of heroic, and it has created new mythologies, and you better take them seriously. Yes, they're out there, and don't ignore them.
New technologies. Now they're out there.
He does have a great voice.
He's got
great voice, and definitely, boy, does he fit into the Star Wars universe. The clip that we got to see at Star Wars Celebration with Werner Herzog, as he was, the source for the Mandalorian's big job, for which there was no, what do they call it, the puck.
Yeah,
there was no puck for that.
He could be some sort of underground Imperial,
for sure,
from the remnants of the Empire.
Yeah, he's flanked by stormtroopers in the clip, and he speaks very wistfully about the days of
the good old days,
the Empire. Yeah. But Werner Herzog does talk in this interview about the way that the show was shot.
Mandalorian was filmed not like all the other Star Wars or other big event films. Green screen everywhere, and the camera motion controlled, moving there. All of a sudden you have a phenomenal step forward. As an actor, you see the entire planet on which you are. You see the landscape, you see the formation. The camera that could even be handheld and move in between us sees the same landscape. It's not green screen and artificiality. It brings movie making back where it should be. It's phenomenal achievement.
All right. Do you get what he's saying there?
I think so.
Okay. What I believe he's saying is that they are surrounded by green screen, but what makes it different from when, say, George surrounded his cast in green screen when shooting the prequels, what makes it different is that the director is actually seeing the set as it will appear in the film, projected behind the actors, building the environment through the lens eye. And so they're seeing it. And I think you can see evidence of this new technology in action if you watch the extra features on The Last Jedi home release. The documentary, the behind-the-scenes documentary called The Director and the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
You see Ram Bergman, who's the producer of The Last Jedi, and he's on the set of Snoke's throne room, and he's walking around with an iPad, and all you see around him is green screen. But in the iPad, as he moves it around, he can move it anywhere around him, 360 degrees, and you see the set as it will appear in the final film. So while they're shooting this thing, they're looking on monitors, not at actors in green screen. They're looking at monitors of the digitally projected set behind them. It's really cool. So you can see that it's in that documentary with the home release for The Last Jedi. So that's what I think Herzog is talking about. And this is the George Lucas dream. This is what George always wanted. And this is something he started developing during the Young Indiana Jones series days. These virtual sets. And he really incorporated them very heavily in the prequel era. And now the technology is advanced in such a way that they're actually able to, from their video village, see essentially what's going to be projected in the final film, how the environment is going to look. So I think that adds a new wrinkle. So, and that's what Herzog was saying. As a director, which he is, that is really something that he finds to be mind-blowing. And it might be the first time he's ever been on a set that's had that incorporated into the technology. Because, as I said, that technology was in place, at least from what I can tell, by watching the Last Jedi documentary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think it's one of those things that is likely to have an impact on the way these types of TV series are done. I think that, or it won't be repeated. I think that this is going to be as significant to live action TV as the Clone Wars animated series was to animated television.
Yeah, what we saw at Star Wars Celebration is enough for me. I know this show is going to be amazing. Mm-hmm. I've seen enough to know that this show is going to be amazing. So they say don't set your expectations too high. I don't think I am. But I know something that looks really good is going to be served up to us pretty soon. I see that in The Mandalorian, no question.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Clone Wars, we've got some clips from Dave Filoni as he was out at Star Wars Celebration talking about the return of the show and really just about bringing back the Clone Wars.
That's a big deal. It was a big deal to do Clone Wars again, not just, personally, but it was very difficult because there are so many people that had moved on that worked on the original. And so the group of us that are still around that had made Clone Wars had to really, in the beginning, sit down and talk to the new team of people and say, this show is not like Rebels. It's a very different show. They're both Star Wars, but in all honesty, like the scale of Clone Wars is massive. You have many, 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 many clones fighting many, many, many battle droids. That's just something the audience is used to. And I wasn't going to do it again unless we could do it authentically and the way we used to do it, but also the improvements, some things we learned making Rebels, some things I've learned just being around. And I do think we have achieved that. I'm very excited by what we're doing, and ending it is really important to me. It's not something that I would want to prolong doing. I don't want to do many episodes of it personally, but I want to finish out things that I started. But I think that, let's be honest, one of the main reasons we brought it back is because people wanted to see it.
Yeah, that does pretty much speak to what, and contradict what I've said, is I believe that if it turned out to be successful, which I had no doubt that it would be, I think it's going to be quite a coup for Disney Plus, that they would potentially bring it back and do subsequent seasons, maybe shortened seasons, several episodes. But what we're hearing from Dave is that, one, it was a feat to even get these done, and it's not something that he would necessarily want to do on an ongoing basis or even be able to do on an ongoing basis. So,
and he clearly defines the difference between Clone Wars and Rebels, two very different shows in scale and scope. That's obvious to just the naked eye, but I found it interesting to hear Dave talk about how vastly different his two series actually are. And just to hear the finality and tone in his voice about wanting to bring it to an end. He said finish, clearly said finish. And he said, but he did, make it clear that he wouldn't want to keep it going, that he is not up to that. I think he's much more focused on live action right now. And this is him putting closure, putting a solid end to an era, really, for himself as a career Star Wars guy.
Yeah.
He's making the move in the live action, and deservedly so. I'm very happy for Dave. But that does end a lot of our speculation about the future of the Clone Wars. We thought, wow, this could just open the door to so many more stories to be told. But it sure sounds like they'll bring it to an end, and I'm sure the story itself will dictate that. We are at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. I think that's the most solid way to put closure on the series, is take it right up to that moment. Anakin and Obi-Wan get into their Jedi starfighters to go out and engage in dogfights with separatist buzz droids and what have you.
You think it's going to get that close?
Yes.
They're going to go right up to it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Lock it down.
I would love to see that. I would love to see that.
Lock it down and put a solid finish to it, so it'll stand there on that streaming series as an epic that you can have in binge watch and see a beginning, a middle, and an end that will bridge the course of everything from the end of Attack of the Clones to the beginning of Revenge of the Sith.
Well, if you haven't had a chance to go back and revisit the Clone Wars in chronological order, not in production order, not in broadcast order, but in the chronological order, and there's a post, if you just type in Star Wars Clone Wars chronological order, you'll see it. It's over at starwars.com. Do yourself a favor, do that. Because, after watching each episode multiple times, doing roundtable discussions about them, I thought that I had really, been there, done that when it comes to Star Wars, the Clone Wars. But I'm having such a good time revisiting these episodes with my kids and seeing them in the chronological order. It's just amazing. I'm jumping back between, season 1, season 3. Here's a season 5 episode. It's just incredible the back and forth that happened, particularly in those first few years. We would hear from Dave, and he would say, "Oh, George really liked this episode." He's like, "Oh, let's do another one." A year or so later, he would remember these episodes and want to do what happened before or what happened after.
Yeah.
Is it any wonder that's how George thinks?
Yeah.
He talks about, writing and creating stories like a painter. You put a little bit on the canvas, step back. Oh, let's put a little more here. Oh, you know what? I missed a spot. Put a little bit here. That's how he thinks. And, but now that it's all wrapped up and you can go back and you can revisit it in chronological order, man, oh man, is it, it's just a blast. It really is. And then you throw in the Blu-ray factor and you look at this thing in glorious high definition, and you just marvel. There's never been anything on TV quite like it since. I'll tell you that. And there wasn't anything like it leading up to it either, for that matter. When you look at the scope and the scale of that series, it really is incredible. I mean, if Disney wants to capture Star Wars magic, they really should. And I'm glad that they're giving Clone Wars some space, because they really do, I think, need to take a good, hard look at that, because that is Star Wars, I think, for the most part, running on all cylinders as episodic TV.
No, yeah, and there's an acknowledgement of that all over the place happening. I thought it would be 10 years before people would start getting their appetite whetted again for the Clone Wars and start demanding to get those final episodes completed. I really thought it was going to take some time. And you know what? I even really consider those final episodes. I thought they would just revamp the story into a theatrical release. And then we would have, like in 2023, the Clone Wars back in the theaters again. But this time, people would be very excited for it. And not to say they weren't excited for it before, but it's just the theatrical release the theatrical release was barely even scratching the surface of what could potentially be done with that series. And when we finally saw what we saw, it was like, holy cow, by, season 2, things were really starting to move on all cylinders. And then by season 3, things jumped into light speed and really just took off from there. But Clone Wars was the big panel happening at Star Wars Celebration on Sunday afternoon. We wanted to make it over there, but we just couldn't because Jason got snowed in and we had to wait for him to finish his travel arrangements as beer was being consumed with the Mandalorian mashups. Could there have been more Mandos on the convention floor in Chicago? I don't think I've ever seen more.
It was a very, very popular cosplay this year.
Huge. I mean, that's something I can maybe jump on board with maybe someday. Put a Mando bucket on it. Doesn't seem quite so restrictive. It seems like you get a little air coming up through the bottom part there, and you can actually drink. There were novels saying that Boba Fett had a straw up in there in that helmet of his, and he can just have a beverage at any time and not even take the helmet off. I kind of dig that situation. Find me at the bar. So Filoni was on stage talking a lot about the Clone Wars, and there are a few good clips in here, but the one I really just want to play is clip 3. This is Dave, and he's directly addressing something we were talking about earlier in the show, the return of Darth Maul. And the information Dave lays on us about Darth's return it really has me excited for what we're going to see in the Clone Wars.
I'm trying to find ways to make the show better, to give you guys more than you've ever had before. And so one of the things I thought would be great is I need to have, and I wanted to have, as much as the Obi-Wan versus Maul fight was brief, I wanted this fight to be big. I wanted this to be an epic lightsaber fight. I haven't done too many of those in Clone Wars of the years, and so this one had to be, I felt, among the best, if not the best we did. So the best way to do that, to have a great lightsaber fight, is go talk to somebody that has done lightsaber fighting. And so I went, and I know Ray Park from over the years, and I said, Ray, wouldn't it be great if, now that I've experienced doing more live action stuff, why don't we just suit you up in a mocap suit and have you be Darth Maul again? So when you see Maul fighting, it's going to be really Maul fighting. And my animation lead and I were watching it. As well as they've done everything in the past when Maul has done lightsaber fighting, there's just something unique about the way Rey moves. It's a skill, it's an art, it's truly him.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, if that doesn't get you excited, especially after what I would express as relative disappointment by the final showdown between Darth Maul and Obi-Wan, and I know there are people who champion that moment, but I'm not into lightsaber duels for the subtle poetry of a 3-second battle. We signed up for a little more, especially when it comes to Darth Maul, who is, without any question, the most dynamic Star Wars character when it comes to placement in the lightsaber duels. So you set your your aspirations on super high when you bring a character like him back. And it sounds like that's what they're doing here with the Clone Wars. When it comes up on the streaming service, they're going to have Darth Maul there, and he's truly going to be played by Ray Park. Ray does have that distinctive move about him. He was moving about on the stage last month in Chicago, and it was just, there's a Ray Park move to him. You could see it in other characters that he played, like when he was the Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow, or when he was the Snake Eyes in G.I. Joe. You know that that's Ray in there. You see the Darth Maul in there. When he was Toad in the X-Men, Toad does Darth Maul moves. So there's something very crystal clear about his presence on a set as far as the physicality of the characters he plays. So here's the final clip from Dave Filoni at Star Wars Celebration Chicago during the Clone Wars panel. It just also ties into some of the things, especially things you were saying about George Lucas earlier in the show, Jason. This is Dave Filoni talking about what and why does the Clone Wars work?
The reason why it works is because I was taught by the master. That's why it works. I was taught by George. I had to sit with him on a regular basis, and he explained these stories to me, and I listened. And for any young person wanting to be in film or any walk of life, when you meet somebody that is more experienced, that can be a mentor, you should listen. You don't need to impress them by trying to say, I already know how to do that. That's not impressive. Listening is impressive. And that was one of the number one skills that I had, the ability to listen. That you guys like any of this at all is just, to me, always, it just shows you how he really knew, George really knew what he was doing.
Wow. Yep. Pretty much. Pretty much.
Absolutely. And there's that foundation there. And so it sounds like the foundation is strong, at least when it comes to the Clone Wars returning.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right. One last voicemail here. We're going to wrap things up. Once again, all voicemails you heard on this show were sent and left by members of the Rebel Force Radio Patreon community.
Hey, Jimmy. Hey, Jason. It's Bianca from Michigan. Just calling in with a quick thought, reactions to the new news we got today regarding the upcoming release schedule for new movies. Like me, I'm kind of confused just like everybody else, because the last, we heard was they were taking a extended hiatus and it'd be a while. Well, granted, after this December, the next movie is coming out in 2022 is, 3 years away. And I just did the quick math and realized, wow, I'm going to be 50 that year.
Oh.
I don't feel like it, of course.
No, of course not.
Interesting.
Time is all relative.
The fact that they've only scheduled 3 movies doesn't really tell us if that's a trilogy. They left those words out. And they didn't really hint that it was part of, the Benioff and Weiss series of movies. So it could go either way. It could be the beginning of the series of movies from Benioff and Weiss, or it could be the trilogy from Rian Johnson, or it could be both, maybe. Maybe you get like a series movie, then the trilogy movie, then the series movie. Who knows? Anything is possible at this point. And that's kind of exciting. A little scary. But I think for the most part it's very exciting. That's it. Talk to you again some other time. Thanks for taking my call. Bye.
Bye. All right. Well, yeah, there are a lot of things that were left out of that press release today. But I did note there was no hint of the word trilogy in the press release either. So we could be jumping to a conclusion by thinking it's a trilogy. I think they're sending a message that's pretty crystal clear that it'll be a cohesive story that will be spread across several movies. Maybe using the word trilogy at this point would pigeonhole themselves more than necessary.
Right.
Maybe the goal is for a trilogy, or maybe the goal is for a sprawling epic that will take place over the course of the next 10 to 15 years.
Honestly, I think they kind of want to get away from the episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I really do. I'm not saying that they're going to go back and rebrand any of this stuff per se, though. Again, they certainly have been using Marvel as sort of their guide. So I think it's really about A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker. That's what I think they want these movies to be known by. I think they really want to see these things as a series as opposed to individual trilogies.
Right. All the branding with the Roman numeral episode designation has been essentially removed. And I believe that was something that happened most recently with Disney taking acquisition of Fox. I think one of the first things they did was rebrand Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, in the library is simply Star Wars A New Hope.
That's right. Yeah, it's been retitled Star Wars A New Hope, just like the rest of these. Now, you and I had a gentleman's bet about Episode 7. I think I said that we were probably not going to get Roman numeral Episode 7 in the opening crawl.
That's
I was
right.
never happier to be wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
It was a $7 bet, too.
It was. But nevertheless, I think I was right when it comes to the overall sentiment, and that's, something that they have been wanting to do for one reason or the other. I don't know why necessarily, other than, like you say, they don't want to be pigeonholed. They want to be able to go in and amongst, hopefully it would be wonderful if they would say, well, you know what, let's do this thing in between that A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Wouldn't that be something? And then they wouldn't have to worry about calling it Episode 4.5.